Welcome to MC Noctis, where every shadow has a story. Stay close to the light tonight, because the river is coming inland. Silas Mercer had worked the Ohio River for 31 years before something knocked 3 times beneath his boat. The first knock sounded like driftwood. The second came from directly below his boots. The third answered from inside the empty whiskey cup in his hand. A man was sitting at the stern when Silas turned around. His name was Will Rourke. His clothes dripped steadily, although the deck around him remained dry. He knew how to guide catfish into Silas's nets and what rested beneath Loch 9. Most strangely, he knew Silas had poured the first drink of every trip into the river since his father taught him the custom. "A cup for whatever went down alone," Will said. Silas had never told anyone those words. Over the next 6 nights, Will became less like a man who had climbed out of the river and more like a man who belonged on land. His lips gained color. His breath began to fog in the cold. He learned to blink, to laugh at the right moment, and to walk without staring at his own feet. At the same time, Silas stopped feeling warm. His reflection faded, and he woke with river water behind his teeth. Still, he returned to the boat, because experienced men often mistake familiarity for protection. On the 7th morning, a security camera recorded Silas entering his house at 3:14 a.m. The real Silas was still 4 miles away, standing aboard his boat while Will practiced his voice. When Silas finally reached home, the front door was open. Someone moved through the kitchen wearing his work coat, his limp, and his face. Then the thing inside the house turned toward him and smiled. "You remembered to lock the doors," it said. Behind it, every faucet in the house began knocking from the inside, 3 times. Silas believed the river knew him too well to deceive him. He was wrong. Something beneath it had been learning him. The people of Bellwether, West Virginia, called the abandoned structure south of town Loch 9. Its concrete towers rose from the Ohio River like broken teeth, surrounding a black current that carried debris in circles for days. Silas Mercer fished there because other men would not. At 52, Silas had shoulders bent by nets and a right knee damaged by a deck winch. He knew the river's warnings. Superstition, he believed, belonged to people who could not separate danger from imagination. Even so, Silas kept one superstition. Before setting his first line, he poured a measure of whiskey over the side. His father taught him never to begin a night on the river without giving something back. Silas repeated the custom long after respect had gone. That October night, he raised the cup toward Loch 9. "For whatever's hungry." The whiskey struck the surface. 3 knocks answered beneath the hull. No branch knocked with the patience of a visitor outside a door. He started the engine. The motor turned once, coughed, and stopped. His work lights dimmed. Beyond their weak circle, fog closed around the boat until both banks disappeared. The first net came up empty. The second bent the rail. Instead of a log, Silas hauled up an old canvas work coat filled with riverweed. A brass badge remained pinned beneath black silt. Loch Crew 9, W. Rourke, 1978. Something inside one sleeve closed around Silas's wrist. He tore free and fell against the opposite rail. The coat collapsed. No hand remained inside it. "That used to fit better." A man sat at the stern. He appeared about 30. His clothes matched the coat and the net. Water fell from his cuffs through the deck, leaving the aluminum dry. Silas reached for the boat hook. The stranger did not blink. "You poured for me? How did you get on my boat?" The man considered the question, as if he had never needed to explain movement before. "I came up." He introduced himself as Will Rourke. When Silas looked toward the stern light, Will's face seemed to flatten, becoming pale and featureless for half a second, before returning to normal. Instead of fleeing, Silas asked what lay beneath Lock 9. Will smiled. "Everything that knocked before you answered." He pointed toward the starboard side and told Silas to lower the net. The water erupted with fish. Catfish filled the mesh. They did not thrash when hauled aboard. Dozens lay facing Will, their mouths opening together. Will accepted the second cup of whiskey. He held it near his lips, but never tilted it. The liquid vanished anyway. When the fog lifted, Silas was alone. On the passenger seat rested the Union badge. The 3 knocks followed him upriver, moving beneath the hull at exactly the speed of the boat. Silas sold the catch before noon and told no one how he obtained it. He placed Will's badge on his kitchen table and slept until dark. When he woke, the badge was wet. A ring of river water surrounded it, though the ceiling and tabletop were dry. Silas wiped the metal, locked it in a drawer, and returned to Lock 9. Will appeared after the first pour. The second night, Will waited on the bow. The third, he sat beside the wheel before launch. His eyes learned to follow objects. His body learned the boat's motion, and by the fourth night, he remembered to blink. Silas noticed, but did not stop returning. The catches were the finest of Silas's life. Will also knew the sunken foundations below Bellwether and the lock workers trapped when the 1978 flood broke the western gate. He spoke of them in the present tense. "They stand when the barges pass," he said. "The vibration wakes them." On the 5th night, something struck the hull from below. Then again. Then dozens of times. Pale fingers appeared along the gunwale, feeling for the easiest place to climb. Silas reversed the engine. Will remained seated. "They can't come above the surface without permission," he said. "Whose permission?" Will looked at the cup in Silas's hand. The fingers withdrew. Silas threw the whiskey overboard and told himself that counted as refusal. Will smiled with patient amusement. "You invited me the first night." "I invited nobody." "The river doesn't understand nobody. It understands hunger." Every fish in the storage bin rolled onto its side and looked toward Silas. Later, while Will stood near the bow, Silas looked down and saw moonlight, railings, and his own reflection trembling on the black surface. Will cast no reflection. The man beside Silas lifted a hand. In the water, Silas's reflection lifted the opposite one. His reflected face remained at the surface with a wet smile, copying Silas's fear only after a delay. Will leaned over the rail, studying it. "Almost," he whispered. Silas demanded to know what he meant. Will did something he had never done before. He inhaled. His lungs unfolded with a shudder. White vapor formed when he exhaled. At the same moment, Silas's breath disappeared. Silas breathed into his hand. Nothing appeared. Will watched the empty air between Silas's fingers. "That is how warmth feels," he said. The engine started by itself. The boat turned toward Lock 9, while Silas fought the wheel. Below them, something enormous rolled through the deep channel, dragging a line of bubbles toward town. Will sat behind him and practiced breathing all the way home. Silas did not return to the river the following night. He emptied the whiskey, locked Will's badge in a drawer, checked every window, and shut off the main water valve. At 2:14 a.m., the shower began running. Water struck the empty tub in slow, heavy impacts. He carried a flashlight down the hall. The tub was dry, but black water rotated inside the drain without descending. Weed trailed through it like hair. Silas aimed the light downward. An eye opened beneath the metal grate. It was far too large to fit inside the pipe. The shower stopped. Behind Silas, a wet foot pressed against the hallway ceiling. Another appeared beside it. The prince crossed toward his bedroom as an invisible man walked upside down through shallow water. Silas locked himself inside. 3 knocks came from the wall behind his head. They moved through the pipes, crossed the ceiling, and stopped over the tub. A drop touched Silas's shoulder. He looked up. Will clung to the ceiling, with his face turned backward toward the floor. His hair hung upward rather than down, floating around his head as if both men were submerged. His mouth opened wider than a human jaw should allow. Black water spilled out. Silas fled. The house became silent, and the main valve remained closed. The drawer containing the badge stood open. One of Silas's work shirts was missing from the bedroom closet. The clothes beside it were soaked and smelled of mud sealed beneath ice. At sunrise, he checked the marina cameras. The first nights showed him pouring 2 cups and speaking to an empty place. On the 6th recording, movement appeared behind him. A second Silas rose vertically from the river. It pulled itself up without bending its limbs, then copied each of Silas's movements several seconds late, testing the old limp in the wrong leg. The clerk at a highway gas station called while Silas was still watching. "You left your wallet here last night." Silas looked at the wallet in his hand. The store camera showed someone wearing Silas's face buying ice at 1:40 a.m. Its smile revealed too many lower teeth. Every display case behind the figure reflected Will Rourke. Daylight made terror seem embarrassing, so Silas returned home. The missing shirt hung dry and buttoned in his closet. That night, Silas slept in a chair with every light on. At 3:14, he awoke to someone breathing beneath the floor. The sound traveled under the boards until it stopped directly below him. Then his own voice whispered through the heating vent. "Almost." Deputy Mara Vance arrived after sunrise. Silas showed her the gas station image and marina recording, without mentioning the face in his drain. Mara watched the second Silas climb from the river 3 times. "A camera error," she said, though she no longer sounded convinced. The kitchen faucet knocked 3 times. The handle turned. Black water rose from the spout and spread across the ceiling with a man's shape inside. Mara drew back. The water collapsed. The ceiling remained dry. Then, Mara's radio reported a missing county surveyor at the old lock. They found his truck running beside Lock 9. Wet footprints crossed its roof and ended at the river. Mara called the surveyor's name. A man stood up in the channel. The water reached his chest, though the bottom there lay more than 30 feet below. He wore an orange safety vest and stared at them with grey, unfocused eyes. "Come away from the edge," Mara ordered. Will's voice came from the surveyor's mouth. "He needs room inside you." The man folded backward and vanished without a splash. Will stood on the opposite bank in Silas's missing shirt. His features slid beneath the fisherman's like something adjusting a mask. Mara launched for county rescue skiff. They had traveled only 50 yards when the missing surveyor knocked from beneath the hull. His face kept pace below the water. Then a hand came over the rail. Mara struck it away. 5 more hands rose. The river filled with pale arms reaching upward from bodies that remained too deep to see.
Silas forced the throttle forward. The skiff stopped, held by the hands.
Will appeared in the passenger seat. He looked nearly human. His cuts and the scar under his chin matched Silas's. Mara spun toward him. "Don't touch him," Silas said. Will smiled. He finally believes. The hands released the boat. Will explained that a drowned thing could not walk ashore until it learned weight, warmth, and breath from someone living. Each accepted drink opened the body a little farther. Each accepted drink opened the body farther. After the seventh, the living man went below, and the thing wearing him went home. Silas counted the nights. "Tonight is 6. Will's smile widened. "You always poured the first cup before I arrived." The boat lights died. In the darkness, someone climbed aboard behind Mara. When lightning returned, 2 Wills sat on the skiff. Then 3. Each wore a different drowned face beneath Silas's work shirt. Mara gunned the motor. The skiff broke free and struck the bank hard enough to throw them onto the gravel. By the time they looked back, the boat was empty. Across the water, a man wearing Silas's body walked along the surface toward Bellwether. Mara took Silas to Gideon Pike, Bellwether's last lockmaster. He lived above an abandoned kiln 2 miles inland, far from running water. He listened without interrupting. When Silas placed the Union badge on his table, Gideon covered it with an iron pan. "That is not Will Rourke," he said. Gideon's old ledger showed that Rourke's remains had been recovered and buried after the 1978 flood. "Then what sat on my boat?" "Something that has used him before." Old crews called it a borrower. It waited inside drowned structures where air had once existed. Any offer of food, drink, or shelter gave it permission to study the living. "Why 7 cups?" "A man is harder to counterfeit than a face. It must learn what your body does without asking." Silas thought of Will unfolding his first breath. Gideon circled the kiln room with river clay fired until nothing organic remained. Moisture carried borrowers across salt and iron. The clay gave them nothing to inhabit. They sealed the doors. No one drank or spoke after midnight. At 12:43, rain began falling inside the circle. Drops formed in midair, fell upward, and spread into a black pool across the ceiling. Will's face pressed through it from above. His features now matched Silas almost perfectly. Only the eyes remained wrong. They moved independently, one watching Gideon while the other watched Mara. Gideon rang an old lock bell. Will's face collapsed, and the water retreated. Then Mara began choking. She fell, clawing her throat as river water poured from her mouth. Something climbed beneath the skin toward her jaw. Silas crossed the clay without thinking. When his boot broke the circle, wet handprints covered every brick, and the doors bowed inward. Voices whispered through the cracks, using Silas's voice to insist they were already inside. Gideon rang the bell again. This time, a pale arm thrust through the solid floor and caught his wrist. The skin of his hand grayed immediately. Silas pulled him free, but 3 of Gideon's fingers remained curled and useless. Will stood inside the circle. He held Silas's whiskey bottle, although Silas had emptied it in his yard. A metal cup rested in his other hand. 6, he said. He squeezed water from Silas's stolen shirt into the cup. Color spread through his face as he drank. The 7th cup remained empty. Will offered it to Silas. "Pour." Silas knocked it away. The kiln walls erupted with knocking. The room seemed to hang inside a submerged structure while shapes felt along the mortar for openings. Gideon struck the bell a 3rd time. The ceiling pool broke apart. Will vanished,
and Mara dragged in a ragged breath. The attack ended as suddenly as it began. The room was dry again. Hundreds of river shells covered the bricks, with one wedged beneath Gideon's eyelid. He removed it without a sound. "There is no dry house," he said, pressing cloth against his eye. "Not while the people inside it are mostly water." Gideon unfolded a diagram of Lock 9. Beneath it, a dry inspection chamber held 2 levers capable of reversing the lower sluice for 90 seconds. Gideon looked at his damaged hand. "We do not summon it.
We do not reason with it. We put it where the current has only one direction."
Mara asked what happened to the person operating the second lever. Gideon did not answer. From inside the iron pan, Will's badge knocked 3 times.
They entered Lock 9 at low water the following night. Gideon led them through a rusted tunnel to the brick chamber below the river. Gideon spread fired clay along the thresholds. Mara stood beside the western lever. Silas placed the empty 7th cup in the center of the floor. At 2:56 a.m., footsteps entered the tunnel. Silas came through the doorway. The copy wore Silas's coat, corrected the limp, and rubbed the scar beneath its chin. Only the wet eyes belonged to Will. "You brought me somewhere dry," it said. "That is generous." Gideon rang the lock bell. The copy folded backward until its head touched the floor between its boots. Black water ran from its eyes without touching the clay. The bell rang again. Every mortar seam in the chamber opened. Water did not spray through. Fingers emerged. Fingertips peeled the mortar apart. Faces flattened behind the walls, mouths working through gaps too narrow for teeth. Gideon shouted for Mara to pull the western lever. It would not move. A lock worker held the mechanism. More workers rose from the floor with chains and wrenches. Silas seized the eastern lever. The metal burned cold beneath his palms. Gideon struck the bell a 3rd time. Someone answered from the lower pit. It used Gideon's young voice to call lock numbers from the 1978 emergency. Gideon froze. A hand closed around his injured wrist. The floor opened like water. Hands wound around Gideon's legs as he thrust the bell at Silas. "Do not let it finish learning you." The bricks swallowed him. Mara screamed and threw her weight against the western lever. It moved halfway. The lower sluice opened. Instead of emptying, black water climbed from the shadows and gathered above them. The copy straightened. Silas rang the bell. Will's face split, revealing every person the thing had learned layered inside. Mara reached the ladder. Silas followed, but the copy seized his ankle. Cold entered his leg and moved upward, stealing sensation as it went. He kicked free, leaving his boot in Will's hand. The water ceiling fell. Mara dragged Silas through the hatch as the chamber filled. They crawled from the tunnel just before the steel access door buckled outward. Nothing followed. Then the copy stepped through the closed steel door. It was dry. Silas lay in mud, unable to feel his right leg. Will crouched beside him and placed a warm hand over Silas's mouth. With the other, it held the empty 7th cup. "You cannot hide inside dry places," it whispered. "You carry the door in your lungs." Mara swung Gideon's bell into the copy's face. The sound sent it staggering, its skin revealing something gray beneath Silas's features. Mara pulled Silas into a truck. The failed chamber had opened every lower gate. 7 human shapes climbed the concrete towers. At the top, each one turned toward Bellwether. Then they began walking down the dry side. By morning, Bellwether had begun to hear the knocking. It came from radiators, closed toilets, bottled water, and pipes beneath Main Street.
At the diner, every glass trembled 3 times before cracking. People reported seeing Silas everywhere. He stood outside the courthouse, passed through hospital doors without triggering the sensor, and bought 7 metal cups. The real Silas hid in Mara's truck. His right leg had turned grey, and the mirror showed Mara sitting alone. The borrower had taken his reflection. Mara wanted to call state police. Silas told her anyone sent near Loch 9 would give the thing more bodies to practice with. They needed Gideon's maintenance diagram, which remained at Silas's house. The front door was open when they arrived. 7 figures sat around the kitchen table.
Water moved beneath the lock worker's dry skin. One had no eyes until 2 opened slowly in his cheeks. At the head of the table sat the copy. It wore Silas perfectly. The figures inhaled steam from bowls of river water, becoming more human with each breath. The copy gestured to the empty chair. "You should sit. This is your house." More figures crawled through the plumbing, pressing shapes along the plaster. Mara reached for Gideon's bell. Every guest turned toward her at once. The copy spoke before she could ring it. "He thought I wanted one life." Its voice came from every bowl. "One body is only how the door opens." At dawn, the municipal intake would draw from Loch 9. If the borrower entered it, every connected pipe would become part of the river. It chose Silas because his work gave it a path to the loch. He had mistaken usefulness for recognition. The copy still needed Silas to pour the 7th cup for the man it had become. "Say the words," it told him. The wall behind Mara bulged. Gideon's face pushed through the wallpaper. His mouth opened, filled with black water, and forced out one word. "Reverse." Silas remembered the secondary control in the pumping station. Opened with the eastern gate, it could reverse the intake. The copy's guests rose. Silas overturned the table. The bowls released impossible depths of water. Chairs floated upward, while pale shapes swam beneath the floor. Mara rang the bell. The guests folded inward, faces collapsing. Silas reached through the water, found Gideon's diagram beneath the table, and pulled Mara toward the back door. A hand caught Silas's numb leg. Beneath the floor, another Silas pounded against the boards. The copy stood across the room. Both smiled at him. Silas tore free. He and Mara reached the yard as every window burst outward with black water. The house emptied in one violent breath. Then it stood dry and silent again. On the porch, the copy watched them leave. It raised the 7th cup in farewell. Far below the street, the pumping station started its dawn cycle early. The pumping station shook as the first intake turbines came alive. Silas and Mara followed Gideon's diagram to a steel platform above the main conduit. The copy waited beside the secondary lever. It wore Silas's face perfectly, with warmth, breath, and a clear reflection below. Silas cast none. Mara stood between them with Gideon's bell. Both men told her the other was the borrower. The copy knew Silas's memories and produced convincing fear when Mara raised the bell. Then the station lurched. The copy caught itself with its right leg. Silas's damaged knee could never have held that weight. Mara rang the bell into its face. The skin came loose. Will looked through Silas's features and struck Mara. The bell fell into the conduit. The river answered with thousands of knocks.
Water climbed the walls. Figures crawled upside down across pipes, while the lock workers practiced screams from the streets above. Silas reached the eastern control. The lever required someone to hold it open. Mara understood. There has to be another way. Silas pulled the lever. The current reversed. Water tore back toward Loch 9. The figures stretched into wet shapes and vanished into the conduit. The borrower did not. It crawled against the current as faces peeled from its body, Will smiling at the center. The seventh cup rolled between them. The borrower caught it. Pour, it demanded. Silas held the lever with one hand and seized the cup with the other. The conduit became a black throat, carrying voices from every house as the river was pulled out of town. Silas filled the cup from the rain dripping off his own sleeve. The borrower became still. It believed terror had finally made him obedient. Silas raised the cup. For whatever stayed hungry. He poured it into the reversing conduit. The invitation went to everything below. The river erupted. Hands climbed through the borrower, using its open body as a path back to water. The drowned lock crew screamed through Will's mouth. The eastern lever began tearing from Silas's grip. Mara reached the emergency gate. Closing it would seal Silas inside. He shouted for Mara to do it. The borrower wrapped both arms around him. Its face settled against his face, feature for feature. "Which one of us will she close in?" it whispered. Mara pulled the gate. Steel dropped between them. The platform vanished beneath black water. Silas was dragged through pipes and bodies that had waited 48 years to move. Will breathed into his mouth as their memories tore back and forth. Thousands of pale figures stood on the bottom, looking up. Every one of them wore his face. He awoke at sunrise on a mudflat 2 miles downstream. Mara found him walking toward Bellwether. She held Gideon's bell in both hands but did not ring it. "Silas?" He answered correctly. She asked him to stand on his right leg. It collapsed beneath him. Mara began to cry with relief. Silas smiled, because he remembered that relief required a smile. 3 weeks later, Bellwether blamed the damage on pressure failure. Gideon and the surveyor remained missing. Silas did not return to fishing. Silas replaced every pipe, yet sometimes woke beside his bed with both palms against the floor. His reflection returned slowly. At first, it copied him several seconds late. Then, it began moving first. Mara eventually brought him her body camera recording. In the final clear frame, 2 men fell into the conduit. One fought the current. The other looked directly at the camera and smiled. The man who crawled onto the mudflat wore the same smile. Silas watched the footage without breathing. From the kitchen drawer, Will Rourke's union badge knocked 3 times. Then, the same rhythm answered from inside Silas's chest. Across Bellwether, every faucet turned on. The oldest river warnings rarely say that monsters live in the water. They say the water remembers how to enter. Silas believed experience made him different from the frightened people who avoided Loch 9. But the borrower did not defeat him by being stronger. It watched. It practiced. It learned every ordinary gesture that made other people trust his face. Perhaps the real Silas escaped the conduit. Perhaps Will Rourke did. Or perhaps something came back carrying enough of both men that even it no longer knew the difference. Thank you for listening to MC Noctis. If this story followed you away from the river, tell me in the comments. At what moment did you first believe Will was not merely a ghost? Like the video and subscribe for the next journey into the dark. And tonight, if a pipe knocks 3 times after you turn off the water, do not knock back. Do not open the faucet. Most importantly, do not offer whatever is inside a drink. A thirsty spirit may leave when it has taken enough. A thing that is learning to be human will always ask for one more.